Next is about dhamanivyakarana shariram व्याख्यास्यामः यथोवाच भगवान् धन्वन्तरिः चतुर्विंशति धमन्योनाभिप्रभावः अभिहितः तत्र केचिदाहुः शिराधमनिः स्रोतसाम् अविभागः शिराविकारा एव हि धमन्यः स्रोतांसि चेति तत्तु न सम्यक् अन्या हि एव धमन्यः स्रोतांसि च शिराभ्यः कस्मात् व्यञ्जन अन्यत्वात् मूलसंनियमात् कर्मविशेषात् आगमाच्च केवलं तु परस्परसन्निकर्षात् सदृश आगमकर्मत्वात् सौक्ष्म्याच्च विभक्तकर्माणाम् अपि अविभाग इव कर्मसु भवति. Now, the dhamani, again a word which is often misunderstood. Most of the times the dhamanis are translated as the arteries because of a definition often or derivation which is often written like dhanat dhamanya. The word dhana means blowing or something which is moving invisibly. That's the dhana. Now, according to Sushruta, the Sira Dhamani, there are 24 varieties of the Dhamanis. There are 24 basic Dhamanis which are present in the body. And according to, again, during Sushruta's period, there was some view like the Sira, Dhamani and Sodas, they are the same. But Sushruta denies that. Sushruta denies that part and says Sira, Dhamani, Sodas are different from each other because they are named as different names, Vyanjananyatvat, Mula Sanyamata, because of the origin being different, and the Karma Vishesha, because they have a different function, Agamacha, because of the textual descriptions which are there, but because they are very close to each other, there is a similarity to the function, and because of the similar function, there can be confusion. Vibhakta Karmanamapi Avibhagaha, though they have different functions, there is a confusion or overlapping of the functions. Now, in the present anatomy, whenever you see a peripheral vascular structure, you will see the artery, vein and the nerve together, which we call as vascular bundles. Whenever you see any peripheral organ, you will have a neurovascular combination. Artery, vein and nerve, they are very close to each other. And in the surgical practice, this has a very significant issue. Whenever we identify any structure, you need to identify these individual structures separately and then handle them separately. And because of that similarity, there could be slightly overlapping of the naming of conditions as Dhamani or Sira or Sotas. Now, according to Sushruta, of course, the concepts are very clear. The functions of the Dhamani are very clear as such. Now, among those 24 Dhamanis, Asam to नाभिप्रभवानां धमनिनां ऊर्ध्वगाः दश च अधोगामिन्यः चतुस्रस्तिर्यगाः. The Nabhi is considered, abdomen is considered as the Mula for the Dhamani also, for the Sira also Dhamani is Sira, Nabhi is considered as a Mula. Now, I just moving away from that basic concept. Now, if you look at the evolution of animals from the biology point of view, the regulatory functions of the cell, they start, if you look at the evolution of the animals starting from a monocellular organism to a simple flagellar organism, the flagella, the locomotive organism of a multicellular organism, primitive multicellular organism, the functions of receiving the sensations and functions of regulating the motor activity, they are they are located at individual cell. Each of the cell would be independently functioning. Flagella would be functioning independently, and that regulation of these functions were at the periphery. Then gradually, as it evolved, animal species had evolved from porifera, then the Ctenophora, the initial species. Gradually, these regulatory mechanisms, they became towards the center, in the central area. And by the time Hydra, by the time the evolution has reached to the level of Hydra, that Cnidaria groups there, the nerves were seen, and the nerves are in the midline of the body. Till then, you couldn't see the nerves, the individual cellular organelles, they would be functioning, and there would be some specialized structures which would help in movement or receiving the sensation, but the regulation of these was in the peripheral area. It became somewhat totally towards the center, the core area in the Plecozoa, that's the starfish group like the regulation is in the center, where the stomach as well as the neurocenter is almost at the same point. In the criteria groups, that's the Hydra groups, the core, that nervous system is developed and the nervous system is in the core area, in the midline of the body. And next, as it evolved, gradually the nervous system started consolidated in the center, the core, and it started just gradually moving up. By the time it's in the echinodermata group, another stage of evolution, there is accumulation of these nerve cells and it's towards moving up towards the head side. And in ecrania, the next level, the brain, a structure which we identify as the brain is developed. And of course in human beings, all the neurological control is in the brain, which we consider as the central zone. Now the point is, there is a gradual evolution of the nervous system from the periphery to the core part of the body, then it's in the center of the abdomen. And now if you look at these groups, like specifically if you look at these groups of evolution, which I said already referred to in the previous diagram, in the platyhelminthes the nervous system was in the periphery and gradually it started going towards the center. In annelids like starfish and hydra-like conditions, the nervous system is presented in the center and there is no question of like a head and tail like. In the ecrania group, they have moved towards the head from the abdomen area, rather it's in the abdominal area, that's the middle of the body. I will not call it as abdomen again, the middle of the body, the location was there. Now this is a basic concept of the evolution. Even when the brain is formed, again in the different groups, like initially the brain was at the lower portion, gradually it moved up and up, and when the identification of a structure as what we call as a head portion, it's seen in the birds, and then of course the mammals like human beings and these monkeys and so on. In the lower animals, the brain is at a lower level, not at the head level, much lower than that of the head, and then it has gradually moved up. This is a part of the evolution process. Based upon that evolution process, the yoga and the concepts of the yoga, they consider the nabhi as the center, because the primary consolidation of the neurological functions, rather it's not only the neurological functions, basic functions of the body like the consumption and digestion of the food. And of course with the consumption and digestion of the food also it is a similar situation. In the annelids, the mouth and the neural ring are together, almost close to each other. Then it gradually moved up and then gradually separated, and now in the human beings you have a gastrointestinal tract which is separate, and the nervous system is separate, and cardiovascular system is separate, and so on. These are all the stages of evolution. But during the evolution, the major functions of the body were located at the center of the body, middle of the body, which now we consider as abdomen. And in the yoga and the chakras, the yoga chakras, the Manipura chakra or the solar plexus has the maximum importance from that point of view, and it again describes the similar situation of the prana shakti moving up from the Manipura chakra towards the superior chakra or towards the inferior area like the Mooladhara chakra, so on. So these are the direction of the movement of the prana shakti in the yoga. Now based upon the similar concept, if you look at the functions of the nervous system again, though we consider the brain as the central nervous system, the major portion of the central nervous system, if you look at the distribution of the nerves, the maximum amount of the nerves are in the midline, and this midline is represented by Sushruta as the nabhi. So nabhi is not only the abdomen, the midline of the body is the nabhi, and from there if you look at the output of the nerves, the cranial and cervical areas, particularly cranial, there are 12, we have to, in this picture it's not there. Then cervical there are 8, then thoracic there are 12, lumbar 5, sacral 5. So if you consider these together, it comes to 30 plus 12 of the cranial nerves, 42. But Sushruta had considered these as 24. They say because of the numbers which there could be some these numbers might have missed due to the dissection process of Sushruta, Or Sushruta might have considered some of these nerves which are formed of the plexus, not these spinal outputs, but if you look at these major nerves of the plexus output, it comes to around 30 instead of 42. So a number which is close to that. So I will not say that whatever Sushruta has said as 24 numbers are representative of the spinal nerve roots directly, but it's somewhat in the similar situation. The concept of the Dhamani and the Chaturvimshati Dhamani has to be looked at with this kind of a view, where you have a core central area of regulation, though the brain is the major, bigger part, but it's not the brain alone which regulates the function. The function is resulting, or function has reached to the periphery through that core part of the body, and this whole core part of the body has to be considered as an abhi, and these outputs, they are categorized as the Chaturvimshati, 24 according to Sushruta, though from the current anatomy point of view and current method of dissection, you may see the numbers bit more than that. That's not the important issue. The functions of these are ऊर्ध्वगाः शब्द स्पर्श रूप रसगंध प्रश्वास उच्छ्वास जृंबित क्षुब्ध हर्षित कथित रुदितादीन् विशेषान् अभिवहन्त्यः शरीरं धारयन्ति. Now the ऊर्ध्वगा dhammanis, the 10 dhammanis which are mentioned by Sushruta. Sushruta has counted these as 10, and their functions are mainly receiving the sensations from the upper part of the body, and the major received sensations which are received are the auditory sensation, shabda, the tactile sensation, of course it's from the throughout the body, but the tactile sensation of the upper part of the body, rupa, the vision, rasa, the taste sensation, gandha, the smell sensation. So primarily the 5 sensations, particularly specialized sensations like the sound, then the taste, the smell, these are received by the urdhvaga dhamanis. At the same time, they also have the motor functions, the motor functions of regulating prashvasa, uchchasa, jirumbita, kshuddhasita, kachita, and primarily majority of these functions are involuntary, though respiration is semi-voluntary. Prashvasa, uchchasa and jirumbita, yawning, these are somewhat semi-voluntary, whereas some of the autonomic functions like kshutu, having that hunger, the feeling of the hunger, they are somewhat involuntary. Whereas hasita, kachita, dudita, the speech and laugh, etc., they are voluntary. So it's a functions of receiving the specialized sensation, functions of regulating the semi-voluntary functions as well as functions of the voluntary functions. These are the major functions of the urdhvaga dhamanis. Tastu hridayam abhipannaha tridha jayate taha trimshat. Further, as they branch up, as they reach to the thoracic area, they branch out into 3 and then they become 30. The branches become 30. So each of these would be branching into 3 and the branches will be 30. Tasam bhadapitta kapashuni tarasan dve dve vahata taha dasha shabda rupa rasagandhan abhirunite. The shabda rupa rasagandha, the specialized sensations are received by the branches which are which contain or which also help in movement or regulation of the doshas of the body or hemostatic functions of the body. Vata pitta kapha shonita rasan vahana means the hemostatic functions of the body. They are regulated or they are facilitated by the sensory nerves. So that's a very simple issue. When you are able to receive the sensation from the surroundings, your environment, your body can change according or modify according to that, respond to the stimulus, and that response to the stimulus is based upon receiving of these sensations, and hence they are supposed to carry the vata pitta kapha shodita. Then dvabhyam bhashate, there are 2 dhamanis which regulate the speech. Dvabhyam ghosham karoti, they 2 of the dhamanis, they facilitate or increase the intensity of the voice. So there are 2 aspects of the speech. One, the formation of the speech. So you have to think of what you are going to speak. The next is execution, producing the sound. So you have the intellectual area of the brain which regulates or which forms the speech. Then the motor functions of the different muscles, including the laryngeal nerve and then the facial nerves, which facilitate the production of the sound. So these are the 2 components of the speech. The speech again has 2 components. One bhashana and ghoshana. Bhashana is you speak, think of what you are going to speak. The words are formed in your thought process and they are executed. So that's the ghoshana. Dvabhyam swapiti, to regulate the sleep asset and to regulate the awakeness. So sleeping center and awakening center and their nerve connections. Dvabhyam swapiti, dvabhyam pratibuddhyate. Vecha ashruvahinyam, the two are regulating the flow of these tears. Vestanyam sriyah sanasam shive. Two of them, they facilitate the production and regulation of the secretion of the milk. Teya shukram narasya stanabhyam abhivahatah. Now, there is one concept of shukra also getting from the stana in the body, not simply of the scrotum or testicles. So, this is a very different concept. I will come to that part later on. Tastveta hatrimshat svibhaga vyakyata. These are the 30 branches of that. Yetabihi urdhvam nabehe udara parshva urat prasthas skandha priyahu dharyante yapyante. The upper part of the body, upper doors of the body is supported by this. Bhavatija atra urdhangamastu kurvanti karmani etani sarvashaha. Now, if you look at these functions from the current anatomy point of view, the major functions of whatever Sushma has described as Urdhva, they are exactly the functions of the cranial nerves. If you look at the cranial nerves, the olfactory, which regulates or which helps in this current smell sensation, the Gandha Dhamani, optic nerve, the Rupa Dhamani, then trochlear, which helps in that secretion of the tears as well as the movement of the palpebrae, the Ashruvahi, and then the trigeminal, which helps in the movement of the as well as sensation of the facial muscles, and and facial muscles, the facial nerve, trigeminal and the facial, they facilitate in the ghosha, producing that sound, producing as such. Then of course, intermediate, these also, the other nerves also, intermediate also, they help in the same ghosha, speech formation, and the trochlear nerve, which is facilitating the shabdavaha, and glossopharyngeal, of course, it also helps in swallowing of the body, swallowing of the food as well as the speech both, and the vagus nerve, it regulates to a certain extent the cardiac functions, to a certain extent, and the speech formation, recurrent laryngeal nerve being a branch of the same. So the functions are, and hypoglossal and accessory, particularly supporting the neck and the muscles movement of the neck. Plus you have the cervical segments of the motor nerves and sensory nerves, which can be considered as the functions of the Urdhva Dhamani. So functions of the Urdhva Dhamani are the major functions of the cranial as well as the upper cervical segments. I am not saying that Dhammanis are the same. It's not that we have to have exactly the similar identification. The current method of identification, current method of dissection is something different from what Sushma had perceived. But the important part is that there is a cranial outflow, which a cranial as well as maybe cervical outflow, which regulates these functions, and that is the gross interpretation of what Sushma has said from the current point of view. You may not be to the minute details, you may not get the same minute details, but as far as the gross functions and the aspects are concerned, they are the Urdhva Dhamanis. Similarly, Adhogamastu Vakshami Karmachasam Yathayatam. Adhogamastu Vata Mutra Purisha Shukra Arthavadin Adhovahanti. The Adhogama Dhamani are again 10, and they also have the functions of regulating the excretion of bladders, stools, or as well as ejaculation of the sperm, and regulation of the flow of menstrual flow as such. Tastu pittashayam abhiprapannaha tatrastamema annapanarasam vipakvam aushnyad vivechayantyo abhivahantyah shariram tarpayati. They also facilitate the absorption and movement of the food in the gastrointestinal tract and help in the digestion process. Arpayanti cha urdhvaganam tiryaganam cha rasasthanam cha abhipurayanti. The nourishment of the body, particularly this absorption of the food, the scalous food, is mainly regulated by this autonomic nervous system. That's exactly the functions there. Then Mutapurisha Svedamscha Vivechayati. It also helps in, these branches also help in separation and the evacuation of the excretory substances like urine as well as the fecal material. Sweat also is included here. Of course, in the Tiryaka Dhamani also you will come across the sweat as an important function. Then Amapakvashayantare Tridha Jayante. In between the intestines, the mesenteric plexus would be formed, which would have the branches which reach to the superior and inferior area of the gastrointestinal tract. Amapakvashayantare Tridha Jayante. ताः त्रिंशत् तासां तु वातपित्तकफशोणितरसान् द्वे द्वे वहता ताः दश अन्नवाहिनी अन्तराश्रिते त्वयवहे द्वे मूत्रबस्तिम् अभिप्रपन्ने मूत्रवहे द्वे शुक्रवहे द्वे शुक्रप्रादुर्भावाय द्वे विसर्गाय ते एव च रक्तम् अभिवहतः विसृजितस्य नारीणाम् अर्थवसंज्ञम् द्वे वर्चो निरसन्यो स्थूलान्तप्रतिपद्ये अष्टौ अन्याः तिर्यग्गामिनानां धमनीनां स्वेदम् अर्पयन्ति तास्तु एताः 30 सविभागः व्याख्याताः एताभिः अधोनाभेः पक्वाशय कटी मूत्र पुरीश गुद बस्ति मेधशक्तीनि धार्यन्ते याप्यन्ते च अधोगमास्तु कुर्वन्ति कर्माणि एतानि सर्वशः. The functions of retention of the food, absorption of the water, absorption and facilitating the movement of the fluid components into the kidneys and then evacuation there, or ejaculation of the semen as well as the production of the semen. Similarly, regulation of the flow of menstrual flow. These are the functions as such. Now, if you look at the pelvic nerve distribution, the lumbosacral outflow of this parasympathetic and sympathetic autonomic nervous system plus a part of the thoracic segment. This is exactly the same. You look at the picture, it's almost same. The celiac ganglion having the 3 branches which reaches to the amashaya, and in between the amashaya and the pakvashaya you have that branches which are mentioned, which regulate the movement of the food, and the functions of regulating the evacuation of the bowels, micturition, the pudendal outflow as well as the sacral outflow from the parietal, these sacral plexus. They are exactly the same. The only difference now is about the finer structural identification. Their pathway, they are now more defined, and there could be a slight variation in the numbers. But if you look at the gross functions, these are the issues of or functions of the thoracic, lumbosacral outflow of the autonomic nervous system plus a few of the thoracic segments. Then Tiryagaha Samprokshami Karma Asam Medhayatam. तिर्यग्गाणां तु चतस्रॄणां धमनीनाम् एकैकाः शतधाः सहस्रधा च उत्तरोत्तरं विभज्यन्ते तास्तु असङ्ख्येयाः ताभिः इलं शरीरं गवाक्षितं विबद्धम् आततं च तासां मुखानि रोमकूपप्रतिबद्धानि यैः स्वेदम् अभिवहन्ति रसं च अभिसर्पयन्ति अन्तर्बहिश्च तैरेव च अभ्यङ्गपरिषेक अवगाः आलेपनवीर्याणि अन्तःशरीरम् अभिप्रतिपद्यन्ते त्वचि विपक्वानि तैरेव च स्पर्शं सुखम् असुखम् अगृह्णीते तास्तु एताः चतस्रो धमन्यः सर्वाङ्गगताः सविभागाः व्याख्याताः. The Tiryaka Dhamanis are 4 and they branch into innumerable branches, hundreds and thousands, that's innumerable numbers, and they spread out throughout the body and cover whole of the body, and cover whole of the body in such a way like they form a network, gavakshitam, network, vibhaddham, they support the body or keep the shape of the body. Atasanka, they also help in maintenance of the width of the body or prevent the body from getting shrunken. Tasam mukhani romakupa pratibaddhani, their ends are final endings or fine endings are connected to the romakupa, the hair follicles, and the structures of the skin, and they help in evacuation of the sweat. So majority of the sweat gland functions, regulation of the sweat secretion is the functions of the Tiryaka Dhamani 1. Another major important functions of the Tiryaka Dhamanis are Tereva Sparsham Sukham Asukam Agranite, receiving the different sensations, a sensation which produces comfort or a sensation which produces discomfort. Now, of course, these are very well known functions of the peripheral nerve endings which we know now. In addition to that, there is another very specific function mentioned of the Tiryaka Dhamani branches, the finer out branches of the Tiryaka Dhamani which cover the whole part of the body, is they facilitate the absorption of the medicines or medical applications like Abhyanga, Parisheka, Avagaha, etc., the local applications which are applied over the surface of the body. Their medical or pharmacological activity is dependent upon these nerve endings or the peripheral structures, branches of the Tiryaga Dhamani, and they help in facilitating the absorption. And hence, all that protocols of Abhyanga, Parisheka, Avagaha, etc., where either you apply some heat or apply some oily substances or maybe rub the area and so on, the different protocols which are followed in the local application of the medicines, they have a relevance from the point of view of stimulating the absorption. Now that's about what Sushruta has said. Now if you look at the same issue from the current anatomy point of view, you know that the whole body is divided into the dermatomes. In the anatomy, you might have studied that dermatomes, the segments of the different parts of the body which will receive the sensations, and they are connected to the spinal nerves, and based upon the spinal nerves you have that the values of that. Now cervical, the thoracic, then lumbar, sacral segments at anterior and posterior parts of the body. This is what you see in any anatomy point of view, and from there the different sensations of the body are received. Now the sensations which you receive, whether it's a Sukha Sparsha or Asukha Sparsha, they are again based upon the type of the nerve endings. The most common types of the nerve endings are the fine nerve endings, free nerve endings, which mainly help in carrying up the touch sensation. Pacinian corpuscles, which help in carrying up the pressure sensation. Then the ruffled and the Michel's these endings, they help in vibratory sensation and position of position sensation. Vibration and position sensations are received. And mucinous corpuscles, again they receive both pressure sensation as well as vibration sensation, and to a certain extent nociceptor, pain receiving nerve endings. The majority of the pain or major amount of the pain also is received by the free nerve endings. So the type of the sensation which you receive would be depending upon which type of the nerve ending is stimulated. So type of the sensation, whether it is a touch sensation or pressure sensation or a vibration sensation, is dependent upon which of the nerve endings are stimulated by the stimulus. So that's exactly what Sushruta has said as such. Now as far as cutaneous absorption is concerned, now you have a very advanced technique of administration of the medicines which is called as iontophoresis. Iontophoresis is a technique where you apply a substance or a packed substance, medical substance, over the skin surface and facilitate a current to move, and that current will regulate the flow of the substance, absorption of the substance, and iontophoresis is considered to be the future method of administration of the drug. Already there are certain medicines which are in vogue like analgesics. They are now very commonly used as the iontophoretic patches. You apply a patch of the drug over the surface of the body, and a microcurrent is made to flow through, and that microcurrent can regulate the amount of the substance which is entering into the body, so patient can have a self-control over the administration. So that's the future technique of administration. Now, and this facilitation is mainly by stimulating nerve endings with a microcurrent. Whatever Ayurvedic protocol advises like heating or rubbing, massaging and so on, or Bashvasveda, so on, Nadi Sveda, so on, all that different sorts of the techniques are the different techniques of facilitating the absorption of the substances like lepa or the taila which you have applied over the surface of the body. There is a very significant similarity. Iontophoresis is a more sophisticated and maybe abridged technique of such stimulation of stimulating the peripheral nerve endings. So Tiryaga Dhamani also are showing the functions of the nerve endings. So in conclusion, the Urdhva Dhamani predominantly cranial nerve functions, Adhoga Dhamani predominantly the lumbosacral outflow and autonomic functions, and Tiryaga Dhamani mainly about the somatic functions of the nervous system. So in total, in gross, the functions of the Dhamani resemble that of the functions of the nervous system, and to a great extent their structural distribution also resembles the same, though there is a minute difference. We will not go into that minute difference level, but in the gross it has to be taken in. Now the further yatha swabhavatakkani mrinadeshu viseshu cha dhamaninam tatha khani raso yehi upachiyate. Even as you see the hollow space in the phloem or stems of the water lily plant. Similarly, in the dhamani also there is a hollow area. Hollow area in the sense, if you look at the axons, in the center of the axon, you will have a relatively hollow area where the fluid would be moving through, and that helps in the propagation of the impulses, the action potentials, and maybe by the through the node of Ranvier from saltatory movements of the impulses. These are well-known phenomena, and this is by the nature of the structure. So dhamani would have that kind of a structure which facilitates the movement of the impulses by having a hollow or structural specification. पंचाभिभूतास्तु अथ पंचकृत्वः पंचेन्द्रियं पंचसुभावयन्ति पंचेन्द्रियं पंचसुभावयित्वा पंचत्वम् आयान्ति विनाशकाले. Now all these sensations are related to the sensations of Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, they are attributed to the Panchamahabhuta which form the body. So they are related to the structural component of the body, and these structural component of the body, like Panchamahabhutas, which we now identify as the chemicals, maybe the chemical content of the body, they are organized and they are made to work or function in a synchronized fashion based upon that receival of the sensation. And as long as the sensations are received properly, the living animal can continue to live and respond to the surroundings. If these functions fail, that any of these functions or all these functions fail, it can result in death. So vinashakale panchatvam mayanti. So it gets destroyed, and then the components of the physical components of the body, they merge with the components in the universe. That's the whole basic concept of Ayurveda. Atavurdhvam srotasa mulaviddhalakshanam upadekshyaamaha. Next is about the srotas. Tatra srotas are otherwise usually translated as lumen, but it's not only the lumen. It's about those which help in secretion, sravanata srotamsi, which help in secretion or facilitating the movement of a substance from one area to the other. They are the srotas. Tanija, prana, anna, udaka, rasa, rakta, mamsa, medo, mutra, purisha, shukra, artavahani. Eshu adhikaraha, ekesham bahuni, etesham visheshaha bhavaha. About the number of srotas, there is a difference of opinion, and according to Sushruta, these are the prana, anna, udaka, etc. And according to some, it's innumerable, and these variations of the opinion can change as such, but basically these are the areas where you have a command, where we can regulate. Eshu adhikaraha. Adhikara is where the srotas can be used to manipulate the disease process. Now, among them, tatra pranamahe dve, tayor moolam hridayam rasavahinyascha dhamanyah. Tatra vidhasya akroshana, vinamana, mohana, brahmana, vepanani, maranam va bhavati. Now, pranamaha srotas, the prana is the or maybe the energy which keeps you alive. Now, I would consider this as oxygen. Now, if you have to have the oxygen, there are two important components. The oxygen has to reach to the lungs, and then it has to get absorbed or get into the blood in the form of oxyhemoglobin. That's one part of respiration. And the other part is that has to reach to the cells and then help in metabolism of the cells. So there are two aspects of the respiration. The respiration which occurs in the lungs due to the ventilation, then the tissue respiration where the oxygen is carried into the cells and the cells will have the metabolic function. That's exactly what Sushruta means by pranavahe dve. The two pranavaha srotas are, the one is from the nose to the lungs where there is an exchange of the gas. The next part, the second part of the pranavaha srotas is the whole component, the mechanism of the flow of oxygen from the blood or from the lungs into the tissues, and then metabolism occurs. If these functions are affected, any of these areas, either in the proximal or the other part, which is more of a functional component, which is affected, it can result in either akrosha, vinamana, mohana, brahmana, impairment of the motor functions of the body, or death can occur. Exactly the same as such. Then annavahe dve, tayor moolam amashayo annavahinyascha dhammaneha. Tatra vidhasya adhanam shulo annadvesha chardhi pipasa anjam marananja. Annavahedve, there are two Annavasrotas. I think that I have heard some of the people saying that Sushruta had two esophagus. So that's not correct. It's not that Annavaha means only the esophagus. Now, if you look at the function of the gastrointestinal tract, again there are two issues. The one important is the food has to reach to the area where the digestion has to occur and get stored. See, I think in some other context we have referred to this issue. Stomach is an area where the food is stored and the buffer function of the energy provision starts. The buffer function in the sense, see, your body requires the energy continuously, all throughout, every minute there is a need of the energy, but you consume the food maybe once in 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever that, interrupted durations. Now that food which is consumed in the interrupted duration has to be converted into a continuous source of energy, so there is a huge buffering mechanisms that has to be modified, and among that buffering mechanism, the most important function of the buffering mechanism is in the stomach. It is stored for a few hours, 1 or 2 hours, and then it gets distributed and then gets digested. So that component of the gastrointestinal tract which carries the food and produces the buffering function, stores there and starts the digestion process. The major amount of the digestion process starts at the stomach. This is one part of the Annavahasrotas. The next part of the Annavahasrotas is this food which is digested, which reaches to the periphery. Now it's absorbed and reaches to the periphery through this vascular system, the gastrointestinal tract, small intestine, colon and so on. From there it gets into the vessels. So these structures are the other components of the Annavahasrotas. And Tatra Vidhasya, if at all they are damaged, there will be, or their functions are affected. Vidha doesn't mean only trauma. Though the word meaning is trauma, we will not consider it only trauma. If there is a impairment of the functions, it can produce pain, anorexia or vomiting or thirst or even death can occur. Udakabahedve tayoh mulam talu klomacha tatra vidhasya pipasa sadyo maranam va. Now the Udakavasrotas, which carries the water, the fluid components, the regulation of the fluid is mainly by the pituitary, which regulates the antidiuretic hormone and keeps the body's volume and the solute concentration uniform. The water content of the body is maintained at a uniform level by that. And then the next part is regulation is by the excretion, that's the kidneys. Now, tayoh moolam, talu. Talu doesn't represent only palate. The structures which are close to the palate, the pituitary, and the cloma is the part which is in the abdomen, which is very close to that of the kidney. Of course, Sushila mentions about the vrukka as well as cloma separately. Probably the cloma represents or very close to the functions of the suprarenals, which also have a major role to play with the diuresis as well as the kidneys. So that whole complex structure of the suprarenal and the renal is cloma. Vrukka is about the kidneys, which help in movement of the fluid from the gastrointestinal tract, from the blood into the or filter the kidneys. See, there are two issues. The blood has to be filtered, the water has to be filtered. That filtering structure is that of the vrukka, and the structure which helps in the regulation or control of that is the cloma. So, but of course, from current point of view, we may consider this as a complex structures. But anyway, these are the two issues. The two Udakavahasrotas are, the first is from the pituitary to the maybe suprarenal, and the next is the suprarenal to the kidney and then excretion as such. That's about the functions of the Udakavahasrotas, and of course if they are affected, they may produce excess of pus or fatal complication. Rasavahedve, rasa, again there is a issue of identification of the rasa and the rakta. We often consider this as the single blood. Of course, blood has two components: the components of the fluid which maintains the hydrostatic pressure, and the cellular components which mainly about the oxygenation and the defense mechanisms of the body. Now in the fluid component again, that providing the nourishment, that's the protein contents and the plasma which provides the nourishment, that component can be considered as a rasa. So, and the major functions of that is to convey that from nourishment from one part to the other part of the body. Aharaha gachanti rasa. Rasa is which helps in movement, and the all the doshas move through the rasa. That's the basic concept of Ayurveda. And these are regulated by the sympathetic and parasympathetic functions of the body. And that's how it is done. The sympathetic functions, they help in contraction of the blood vessels, and hence the pressure of the flow can be increased. And parasympathetic, or the other way, impairment of that sympathetic functions can help in reduction of the pressure. And either they have two areas. Sympathetic has one, it stimulates the heart directly and produces the contractions, it enhances the contractions. It's the synovial node, that Hridaya as such. And Rasavahi Dhamani, over the vessels, they also have that alpha and beta receptors. Through that alpha beta receptors, they either produce the constriction and the dilatation of the vessels. So sympathetic control of the blood flow has two components. One, enhancing the pressure of contraction of the heart by stimulating the SA node, and the other is regulating the flow at the periphery, the blood vessels, by either making them contract or dilate. That's the two. Rasavahe dve. Tayormulam hridayam rasavahinisya dhaminiha. Tatra vidhasya shoshaha, there could be atrophy, or pranavidhavacya maradam, there could be fatal complications. Raktavahe dve. Tayormulam ekatlihanam cha. Raktavahinisya dhaminiha. Tatra vidhasya shavamdata, jwaro, daha, pandita, shonitagamanam, raktanetrata cha. Rakta is the hemoglobin component. Ranjana, when which gives a red color to the blood, which helps in carrying up the oxygen. Of course, as we have discussed earlier, though the RBCs and hemoglobin is now produced in adult life more from the bone marrow than the other, in the fetal life, liver and spleen have a role to play. But even in the adult life, liver and spleen have a major role to play with the hemostasis, though finally the hemostatic organ is the bone marrow. So, Ekaspliha, these are the areas which help in the bone marrow to facilitate the hemopiesis. And the Raktavahini Dhamani, the vessels which carry the blood. There are two issues: hemopiesis occurring at the bone marrow and facilitated by the liver and the spleen. And the other component is they reach to the tissues, the movement of that. These are the two components of the Raktavahasrotas. Tatra vidhasya, if there is an injury, it can result in shavamdata, cyanosis, jwaro, daha, pandita, shonitagamanam, raktanetrata. There could be bleeding or even all the signs of anemia. Mamsavahe dve, tayormulam snayu tvacham raktavahasya dhamanyah, tatra vidhasya shvayatuhu mamsashoshaha siragrantheyo maranancha. The mamsavahasrotas are mainly located in the subcutaneous area, below the sphincter, and Raktavahasya, they also are facilitated by the vessels, the blood vessels there. So, if you look at the metabolism of the fat and the functions of the fat is not simply to keep the body shape. They have different functions. Of course, they have a major role to play with the appetite. They have a role to play with the hemostasis. They also help in protection of the body from the heat, or maybe regulating the heat of the body. And they have a major role to play in the innate immunity and the inflammation. Fat as such, I think we have discussed that part earlier when we discussed about the dhatus, the white and the grey fat as such. So these are the different functions of the Mamsa Dhatu and Mamsavasrotas, and if there is a impairment, they can produce a generalized edema, atrophy of the structures of the body or thinning of the body, dilatation of the vessels. That's very important. Siragrantaya. The shape of the vessel is supported by this adipose tissue. If the adipose tissue is lost, the vessels become dilated. It's not only the walls which result in the varicosities, dilatation of the vessels can occur due to that also. Then Medavahe dve, tayan mulam kati vrukavja, tatra vidhasya, swedalaminam, snigdhantata, talu shoshaha, sthula shopata, pipasaja. The vrukka and kati, they help in the maintenance of the Medavahasrotas. Medas is the fluid and electrolyte balance, which we have already referred to in the previous chapters as such. So maintenance of the fluid and electrolyte regulation is the two major functions of the kidney, vrukka, as such. As I told, we have discussed earlier, kidney and suprarenal and their functions, there is a slight difference, and in the context of this, we have to take up that the fluid filtering mechanism of the kidney, and in the fluid filtering mechanism of the kidney, there are two issues. One, the blood has reached the kidney through the renal vessels. That's the cutty area, the area of the lumbar area where all the vessels converge together towards the kidney and then vrika. And if they are injured, their functions are affected, the excretory functions are affected. There could be snigdhangrada, stulashokata, the pitting edema produced in case of the nephrotic syndrome-like condition, as you see over the image, and tarshosha, swetagamanam, pasacha, all the signs of viremia. मूत्रवहेद्वे तयोर्मूलं बस्तिः मेढ्रं च तत्र विद्धस्य आनन्दवस्थिता मूत्रनिरोधः स्तब्धमेढ्रता. Now the functions of the kidney vrika is only to form the urine, but carriage of the urine beyond that is but done by the other urinary collecting system, the areas of urology. Again, we have discussed this issue earlier about urology and nephrology and about that issues. Now the collecting system of the renal pelvis, then the ureters, bladder and the urethra. There again you have two aspects of the function. The first is to collect and store in the bladder. The next is evacuate. So they are the two, the mutravahedve, the collecting component and the evacuating component, the urethra and the bladder. And their moolam bastir medrancha, basti and the penis is the external urethra is the structures there. Tatra viddhasya, if there is an injury, anandhavastita, the bladder could be distended, mutra nirodha, there could be retention of the urine, stabdha medrancha, the penile erection would be affected. पुरीशभहेद्वे तयोः मूलं पक्वाशयो गुदं च तत्र विद्धस्य आनः दुर्गन्धता ग्रसितान्तता च. In the regulation of the fecal excretion, there are again two components. One component which is stores that stools, the sigmoid colon and the rectum. The other component is the anus, which helps in evacuation. This again we have discussed earlier, the functions of this and the regulation of the movement and the dyssynergia issues we have discussed in case of the Arshas chapter. So if you remember that, there again you have the two components, the component of storage of the stools and the other is getting the sensation of the storage and then evacuation, facilitating the evacuation. So these are the two components of the Purishavah Srotas, and their Mula Pakvashaya, the rectum which stores rectum and the proximal portion of the colon, so distal portion of the colon which helps in storage, and the anus which helps in evacuation. Tatra viddhasya anaha durgandhata gratitantrata, they can produce the dilated megacolon, gratitantrata, megacolon components can occur if there is a failure of evacuation of the stools. शुक्रबहेद्वे तयोर्मूलं स्तनौ वृषणौ च तत्र विद्धस्य क्लीबता चिरात् प्रसेकः रक्तशुक्रता च. Shukravasa Srotas, again there are two aspects, stana and vrishana. Now stana is the sensory component which facilitates the ejaculation. See, ejaculation won't start all of a sudden. There has to be some sensory stimulus. A stimulus has to reach from the external surface of the body. Either it could be touch sensation, visual and so on. The different sensation can produce the stimulus, and that results in the erection and the other environment which requires or which facilitates ejaculation. Ejaculation is the terminal act of the sexual activity, and these are the two aspects of that, the sensation, and probably that stana is considered to be that area of the body which carries a sensation. Of course, in the sexual arousal, there are some sensitive points which are also called as J points, as such, I think, in the other way. Certain points of the body, they are supposed to facilitate or maybe stimulate the sense, that sexual stimulus, and stana is considered as one of them. Not necessarily stana in every person. It could vary from one person to the other. And there are now in the current system, there are some method of identification this J points and then stimulating the J points and so on. They are also part of the systemic or maybe the counseling on the impotence and so on, sexual abnormalities. Anyway, that's about the point, like. And then vrishana, the whole mechanism of formation of the semen and then ejaculation, that's also we have discussed about the formation of the semen in the testicles, storage in the seminal vesicle, and then ejaculation at that part. So these are the two components of the Shukravasa Srotas. Tatra viddhasya klipata chirat prasekah rakta shukrata. If their functions are impaired, that can result in impotency or maybe abnormalities of the fertility. Artavahedve तयोर्मूलं गर्भाशयः आर्तवाहिन्यश्च धमन्यः तत्र विद्धायाः वन्ध्यात्वं मैथुन असहिष्णुत्वम् आर्तवनाशश्च सेवनिच्छेदात् रुजाप्रादुर्भावः बस्तिकुतविद्धलक्षणं प्राप्तम् इति. Now the artavaha are the two, where the first is the whole process of that menstrual cycle forming with the follicles formation and the endometrial proliferation. The next component is the endometrial separation or secretion. So endometrium, they have two components, the proliferation area, the component, and the next is the separation and the excretion component. Now these are the two phases of the menstrual cycle which are considered as the two srotas there, and they are regulated by the artavaha dhamani. Dhamani is the total the autonomic nervous system as well as the hormonal mechanism which regulate that, and if they are functioned, they can result in vandyatvam, maithuna asahishitvam, inability to have the copulation as such, artavanashashta, amenorrhea. So these are the possibility. Then the other is about the other structures which could be injured are sevani and bastikuddhavidha lakshana also can occur if they are injured. Srotavidha pratyakya upachareta, uddhritashalyam kshanabhyanena upachareta. Srotavidha can be of two components. One, functional impairment, where you have to treat them as a difficult conditions, prognosis is poor and hence they have to be treated as pratyakya. If there is a traumatic injury, uddhritashal, there you have to follow the Kshatabhidhana, the protocol of dealing with the foreign bodies and injuries. So traumatic injuries and the functional impairment, they have to be treated with a different perspective as it. Bhavati chatra moolat khadandram dehe prasutam tu abhivahyat srotas taditi vijnayam sira dhamani varjitam. The srotas are spread throughout the body and their distribution is very fine, and they are compared to the distribution of Bisa mrinala, the water lily plant stem. Now if you look at the capillaries and the distribution of the capillaries as well as the neurovascular structures in total, microscopically, you have a microscopic appearance of that neurovascular capillaries in this image, and look at the image of a water lily plant and its roots. That's exactly the same, and whatever Sushruta has said can be substantiated with this image. With this, we conclude the chapter. Iti Sushrutamidam Sharirasthane dhamanivyakarana nama navamodhyayaha. If there are any questions, we will try to answer, and then right. Okay, there are no questions, so we will wind up. Thank you.